My friends, here is everything you need to know about Trump's 2025 US Army Parade. As you know, the 14th of June is an important date in American history because it marks the birthday of the US Army. On the 14th of June 1775, the Second Continental Congress created the Continental Army to unite the militia units of every of the 13 colonies to fight against British forces. And this is not any birthday, this is the 250th birthday of the US Army. I'll cover each historical period that will be covered in this parade in just a moment. Other than that, in comparison to all the other branches, the US Army is by far the largest, with an estimated 450,000 personnel and another 175,000 in the Army Reserve. But that's not all. The 14th of June is also Flag Day, which commemorates the adoption of the US flag in 1777, although it had a different design back in the days. The 14th of June 2025 will also coincide with Donald Trump's 79th birthday. There's gonna be lots of birthdays. And what's better than a military parade to cement Trump as a true Roman emperor? Not only that, it's also a celebration that will allow Americans to know their army and their soldiers. Personally, I think it's a great thing. Never say no to a healthy scoop of patriotism. Now, okay, a lot of voices raised concerns about the cost of the parade, up to $45 million, especially amid budget cuts to veteran services and other federal programs, plus potential damage to city streets. To be fair, these $45 million will do less overall damage than the US Army's Emma recruitment ad. Now, something interesting, or rather interesting, is how military parades are generally rare in the United States. When they happen, it's usually to mark decisive victories in major wars. Hold on, just like the Romans did. For example, following the Union's victory over the Confederate States, the Grand Review of the Armies took place in May 1865, during which 145,000 Union soldiers marched through Washington, D.C. in front of their generals and jubilant crowds. Same thing after World War I. Over 25,000 troops, prominently featuring the Big Red 1 Division, freshly returned from France, marched along Fifth Avenue in New York City. In 1946, right after World War II, over 15,000 soldiers, drawn mainly from the 82nd Airborne Division, marched in New York City, cheered by millions of spectators. After the Vietnam War, no parade, just PTSD. The last major parade happened in 1991, when 8,800 American troops marched through Washington to celebrate the defeat of Saddam Hussein's army during the Gulf War. Fast forward to 2025. Approximately 6,600 US Army personnel are expected to march down Constitution Avenue in Washington, D.C. A bit like British forces did in 1814, but hopefully this won't result in the White House turning to ashes. The 2025 parade will be huge. It will feature as many as 150 vehicles and 50 aircraft. And yeah, 6,600 US Army soldiers, the largest parade in the last 30 years. By comparison, Poland's Armed Forces Day parade features around 2,000 service members, while France's Bastille Day parade on July 14th typically includes 4,000 to 5,000 troops marching down the Champs-Élysées. So the US will be number one at the top of NATO countries. But if we look globally in terms of grand spectacles, Russia's May 9th parade of 2019 saw 13,000 military personnel walk down the Red Square, and 12,000 Chinese troops participated in the celebrations for the 70th anniversary of the People's Republic of China in 2012. Maybe the US can reach that level for Trump's 80th birthday. Most importantly, it will showcase the 250-year history of the US Army. And personally, I think that's the most interesting part. Historical reenactors from different eras will march down in period uniforms, followed by troops of that same unit in their regular battle dress uniforms. So how about we explore the different historical time periods that will be covered in this parade, and learn more about the units that will be marching down in Washington, D.C. Oh yeah, let me know in the comment section if your unit was mentioned in this video. Naturally, the open segment of this parade will honor the Revolutionary War, a conflict that claimed the lives of approximately 25,000 American colonists in the fight for independence from Britain. 25,000 was a lot at the time. It represented 1% of the total population of the 13 colonies. In comparison, that would be equivalent to 3 million losses today. The first unit that will have the honor to march in front of President Trump will be the US Army's oldest active duty formation, the 3rd Infantry Regiment. After the War of Independence, George Washington disbanded the Continental Army and only kept one regiment of 2,600 veterans to protect the western frontier from Native American raids. That's how the 1st American Regiment came to be in 1784. The idea was to keep a small army, and if they needed more manpower, they would only call up militia units. The idea looked good on paper. In reality, it turned into a complete fiasco, mostly because militia units had poor training and were reluctant to fight outside of their home states. So this made it very difficult for the federal government to effectively defend the borders of the United States. Now, the man of the 3rd Infantry Regiment will most likely be wearing the iconic blue coat with red facings, white trim, and tricorn hats associated with the Continental Army. They would be armed with brown vests, or some similar flintlock smoothbore musket. George Washington will also be resurrected for this parade. He will be accompanied by 2 dragoons and a 5 and drum corps. Now, I often hear people ask why did the soldiers back then wear bright uniforms, and not something that could provide them with more camouflage. Well, long story short, after the first volleys from hundreds of black powder muskets, the entire battlefield would be covered in a thick layer of smoke, a bit like in a reggae festival. Bright uniforms were then essential to improve visibility, avoid friendly fire, and it also made command and control much easier for unit leaders. And you know what, even with the bright uniforms, the big flags, and the music bands, friendly fire was still a common occurrence. Now, after the Revolutionary War period, there's a big jump in time. I would have really liked to see the shakos and the sleek Napoleonic-style uniforms of the War of 1812. Sadly, here from USA Today we learn, some time periods have proved harder to find period dress from than others. The army struggling to outfit soldiers in uniforms from the War of 1812 and the Spanish-American War. GG, well played. There's also the Mexican-American War that could have been featured, especially since that's when the 3rd Infantry Regiment was given its nickname, the Old Guard. But let's say the timing is not the best right now. No! So the next era that will be covered in the parade is the US Civil War, a terrible conflict that cost the lives of up to 750,000 Americans. We'll probably see Union line infantry wearing dark blue wool coats with light blue trousers, the iconic blue kepi or forage cap. Maybe we'll even see some zouaves. All the soldiers will most likely be equipped with Springfield Model 1861 rifle muskets, but we could even see some Spencer carbines as well. The Spencer was a deadly weapon because it combined rapid-fire capability with a self-contained metallic cartridge, allowing soldiers to unleash up to 7 shots in seconds. Due to its lightweight and compact format, this was the weapon of choice for cavalrymen and mounted infantry. For this period, it's the 4th Infantry Division that will be featured. Hold on, but why? This division didn't even exist before 1917. Well, it's because some of its subordinate units, like the 8th Infantry Regiment, trace back their lineage to the US Civil War. Fought in famous battles like Antietam, Fredericksburg, and Gettysburg, where on day 3, the 8th Ohio Infantry managed to outflank Pickett's charge, unleashing their loads into the Confederate rear and captured 300 enemy troops. Actually, this stays between us, okay? But the 8th Infantry Regiment was actually created in 1838 and fought in the Mexican-American War. But like we said earlier, this can't really be celebrated at the moment. Naturally, other than the 8th Infantry Regiment, there were other candidates, like the 116th Infantry Regiment from the Virginia Army National Guard. Thing is, it descends from the Stonewall Brigade led by General Jackson. But as you can imagine, depicting a Confederate unit in a US Army parade anniversary is like inviting your ex to your wedding. Oh, talking about the Confederates. Trump will restore the original names of military bases that were renamed after the mostly peaceful BLM protests.
Restoring the names to Fort Pickett, Fort Hood, Fort Gordon, Fort Rucker, Fort Polk, Fort A.P. Hill, and Fort Robert E. Lee.
We can also mention how more than 180,000 black soldiers, many who were former slaves that escaped from the South, served in the US Army between 1862 and 1865 as part of the United States Colored Troops. They're famously depicted in the movie Glory with the attack against Fort Wagner. This section will also cover the Indian Wars. The mostly peaceful Western expansion.
The cavalry attacked.
That's where you'll see 25 soldiers from the 1st Cavalry Division's Horse Detachment from Fort Cavazos in Texas that will parade in period uniform. This unit will be formed by 12 horses, 2 mules pulling a Model 1878 Army escort wagon, and even a dog named Doc Holliday. Although such horse detachments don't have a combat value, it's important to keep them just for the tradition, because it's something that can be lost very quickly. We often forget about it. But Native American scouts proved essential to the US Army. Without them, the Western expansion would have been extremely difficult. For example, we can name Bloody Knife, who fell right beside Custer at the Battle of Little Bighorn. By the way, the insignia of these Indian scouts was crossed arrows. And guess what? It later served as inspiration for the insignia of the special forces. There were also the Buffalo Soldiers, regiments made up entirely of African American soldiers, who led mostly peaceful raids on native villages. Since the Spanish-American Wars, no bueno, no posible with the uniforms, the next historical period that will be covered in the parade is World War I, where 116,000 Americans lost their lives. Although the doughboys arrived into the battle at the last minute, it proved to be enough for the Germans to eventually give up.
Oh my God, bro. Oh, hell no, man.
For this part, it's the same 4th Infantry Division that will be featured. By the way, it's called the IV Division. Do you know why? Because the 4th Division in Roman numerals is IV. The 4th Division distinguished itself in reducing the Saint-Mihiel salient in September 1918. The IV Division will have to share the spotlight with the 42nd Infantry Division. It was formed in August 1917 because the War Department wanted to create a division that would bring together National Guard elements from 26 states and the District of Columbia, a symbol to show the union of the country. As a result, it became known as the Rainbow Division. Let's just say they were ahead of their time. American troops under General Pershing arrived in France wearing their olive drab service uniform and Montana Peak hats, proudly holding their motto 1903 Springfields in hand, believing their marksmanship was key to victory. Let's just say they were quickly taught the reality of trench warfare. US troops had courage and they were motivated, but they had zero knowledge in combined arms tactics. As a result, they were largely trained and equipped by the French army. However, with time, US Army units got better, but still suffered very high casualty rates due to their lack of experience. And then all of a sudden, the war was over. As for gear, US Army soldiers traded their hats for the British-made Brodie helmets. Now, in terms of heavy weapons, the parade will feature a French 75mm field gun pulled by horses from the 4-Sill artillery half section, as well as a French Renault tank towed on a trailer. Fun fact, the first tank assault in US Army history took place on the 12th of September 1918 during the Battle of Saint-Mihiel, where an officer you probably never heard about, Colonel George S. Patton, advanced with 144 French-made Renault FT tanks towards German positions. Now the pièce de résistance, Hollywood's favorite, World War II, which saw the US Army grow to 11 million personnel. Between 1941 and 1945, the US Army fought in unforgettable campaigns like Normandy, the Philippines, the Battle of the Bulge, Okinawa, and many more. Battles that cost the lives of over 407,000 American service members, and saw the birth of as many burger-loving babies across liberated countries. For the US Army, World War II saw the rise of armored units. That's why we'll see some M16 half-tracks, the iconic Willys M38, and of course M4A1 Shermans. But World War II also saw the birth of parachute infantry regiments. That's why it will be troops of the legendary 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions that will march down Washington, D.C. in front of President Trump. The 82nd Airborne was the first US division to make a combat jump in Sicily in 1943, whereas the 101st Airborne, the Screaming Eagles, is best known for its heroic defense of Bastogne while fully encircled during the Battle of the Bulge. And yes, Band of Brothers is still the best World War II TV show there is. It's not even a debate. Looking at all this, 100% they will mention D-Day, when both the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions jumped on Normandy. That's how nearly 18,000 paratroopers and glider troops from these two divisions wreaked hell behind the enemy lines. But the sacrifice also came at a cost. The 82nd and 101st suffered 10,000 casualties in Normandy, mostly in the first days. In July 1944, they were relieved from the line and then sent to England to refit. And that's when they had to jump on Holland as part of Operation Market Garden. Within a few days, US paratroopers suffered another 6,500 casualties. Operation Market Garden also marked the 82nd and 101st last combat jump during World War II. These paratroopers will be wearing the Model 1942 paratrooper jump uniform, the M1C or M2 para helmet, perhaps even with some netting and camouflage. Of course, they will be armed with the iconic M1A1 carbine. Some will have the semi-automatic M1 Garand rifle, or even a Thompson submachine gun. This section will open the first flyover of the parade with C-47 Skytrain transport aircraft, B-25 Mitchell's bomber aircraft, and P-51 Mustangs fighter aircraft. Why are there even aircraft as part of the US Army parade? Well, that's because the Air Force didn't exist until 1947. Before that, the Air Force was attached to the Army. I also wonder if they'll show the pinup girls pilots used to paint on their aircraft. Oh yeah, regarding the US Army, World War II also saw the implementation of the very wasteful individual replacement system, which caused unnecessary high casualty rates in the ranks of US infantrymen. If you're interested, I made an entire video about it, the link is in the description below. 5 years only after World War II, the United States found itself at war once again. This time to defend South Korea from a communist invasion from the north, sparking a conflict known as the Korean War. Whether it was the fear of communist expansion in Asia, or a severe case of yellow fever in Washington, Americans were once again crossing the Pacific in a hurry for some action. And that was before passport bros were even a thing. To commemorate the sacrifice of over 36,500 American soldiers is the 2nd Infantry Division that will be featured in this parade. It's not a coincidence since the 2nd Division is still stationed in South Korea today. The other US Army unit that will represent the Korean War is the 3rd Infantry Division. It earned great respect for its feat of arms during the Chosin Reservoir campaign, where it guarded the flanks during the difficult withdrawal of friendly forces. Oh yeah, here are fun facts about the Korean War that you probably didn't know about. Because of shortage of personnel during the Korean War, the US Army was forced to end its practice of racially segregating Black and Puerto Rican soldiers. For the same reason, it was also forced to integrate over 40,000 Korean soldiers to beef up US Army units as part of the Katyusha program, which still exists today but on a much smaller scale. Now as for equipment, World War II and Korean War uniforms and weapons are practically the same. No, that's not true, you don't know anything! What I find interesting is how the Korean War was largely forgotten about by the public. I can't think of any movie or TV show from the perspective of US Army soldiers. The only time it's mentioned, it's really at random. Like Red Foreman in That 70s Show.
You know, one time in Korea, we had this little guy outnumbered 20 to 1.
And Walt Kowalski and Grant Torino.
We used to stack like you 5 feet high in Korea, use you for sandbags.
In both of these cases, these men are not portrayed as heroes, but as rough, grumpy, aging veterans whose sacrifices are just overlooked. To contain the spread of communism in Southeast Asia, Part 2, the United States also ended up intervening in South Vietnam.
Good morning, Vietnam!
2.7 million US military personnel were deployed in Vietnam, of which 58,000 lost their lives. Many were young draftees pushed into the war for a 12-month tour. To represent the Vietnam War era, it's the legendary 1st Cavalry Division that will march down Washington, D.C. But then it had swapped its horses for helicopters such as OH-7 Cases, AH-1 Cobras, or UH-1 Iroquois, which we should all see fly over during the parade. The US Army used nearly 11,000 helicopters in South Vietnam during the war, of which nearly half were lost. Helicopter crews suffered one of the highest casualty rates of all units in the US military. The 1st Air Cav is most notorious for its actions during the 1965 Battle of the Ia Drang, famously depicted in the movie We Were Soldiers. Apocalypse Now also clearly features a fictionalized portrayal of the 1st Air Cav. Oh yeah, then there's also Platoon, directed by Oliver Stone, who was a 1st Cavalry Division veteran. His film is like a semi-autobiographical depiction of his experiences in Vietnam. The Vietnam War era is also very popular still to this day because of the music. I mean, these playlists are racking millions of views. The other US Army unit that will have the honor to march in front of President Trump is the 25th Infantry Division, whose troops, now equipped with M16s, fought tooth and nail to push back the Viet Cong during the Tet Offensive. Apparently, some soldiers of the 101st Airborne will also be wearing Vietnam-era uniforms to represent historic battles such as Hamburger Hill. After the Vietnam War, the US Army would completely stop using the terrible individual replacement system and rather switch to a rotation of entire units. We end the 20th century with the Gulf War, or more specifically the 1991 Operation Desert Storm, which led to the complete collapse of the Iraqi army within 100 hours. The pinnacle of the air-land battle conceptual framework, and cost the lives of 148 American service members. 2 US Army units will be represented for this part of the parade. The 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One, who was responsible for the initial charge against the Saddam line, allowing for the rest of 7th Corps to exploit the breach. Its rapid advance in battles like Norfolk and Medina Ridge destroyed hundreds of Iraqi armored vehicles and captured thousands of prisoners. The 2nd unit featured will be the 1st Army Division, the old Ironsides, who obliterated 440 enemy tanks, the equivalent of 3 entire Iraqi armored divisions, at the cost of 4 soldiers KIA and 52 wounded. To commemorate the US Army's mechanized warfare prowess in the Gulf War, We will see M2 Bradley's 155mm Paladin self-propelled howitzers, M1A1 Abrams, and towed 105mm M119 howitzers. At this point, I think they should just do battle reenactments like in ancient Rome. Now that would be cool. The next era is the global war on terror, or Iraq's second taste of freedom.
Oh shit, here we go again.
The global war on terror saw the deployment of nearly 2 million US military personnel in Iraq and or Afghanistan between 2001 and 2021, the longest war for the United States to date. During this war, Iraq saw higher US military death compared to Afghanistan. 4,400 fell in Iraq compared to just under 2,500 in Afghanistan. Multiple units will be featured for this part of the parade. Some sources mention the 3rd Infantry Division. If so, then okay. They're lucky enough to get to double dip right in front of President Trump. Now the question is, what was their role during that war? Well, during Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2003, the US Army's 3rd Infantry Division spearheaded the assault on Baghdad, playing a crucial role in the rapid collapse of Saddam Hussein's regime. For its outstanding performance, the division was awarded the Presidential Unit Citation. That's also when we'll see some Striker APCs as part of the parade. However, what's for sure is how the 160th Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers, will be present. For the regiment's role in Operation Neptune Spear, the raid in which Osama bin Laden was given the banhammer from the Discord server. We also have the 10th Mountain Division, whose men applied their mountain warfare expertise, tracking down Taliban forces in over 20 deployments to Afghanistan. Of course, the United States Army Special Operations Command and Rangers will also be featured. They played a pivotal role in the global war on terror. These units conducted counterinsurgency campaigns, disrupted enemy supply lines, and also trained local forces. That's also when we'll see some OH-6 cases, MH-60 Blackhawks, and MH-47 Chinooks fly over the parade, since they were so instrumental to US Army personnel both in Iraq and Afghanistan. As part of the modern era, we'll see some elements of the 7th Infantry Division, renowned for its combat operations in the Asia-Pacific region during World War II and the Korean War, and they will be followed by the 11th Airborne Division. It was the only US Airborne Division to be deployed to the Pacific Theater during World War II. They notably conducted a combat jump at Tagaytay Ridge on February 3, 1945. Otherwise, they were mostly used like Marines, as they were part of multiple amphibious landings in the Philippines. Hold on! Both the 7th Infantry and 11th Airborne have a huge history of fighting in the Pacific Theater. Is this some kind of foreshadowing? I guess we'll have the answer in 2027. Apart from them, there will also be the 82nd Combat Aviation Brigade, known for its intervention in Panama in 1989. Of course, at this point, the parade will also feature men and women from the Army Reserve. And for this modern era of the US Army, we'll also see multiple armored vehicles, tanks, artillery pieces, and aerial assets. At the end of the parade, the Army's Golden Knights parachute team will jump over the White House, landing near Trump to present him with the folded flag. Right after, 250 new recruits or re-enlisting service members will be sworn in to the Army by Trump. And yeah, I hope you liked this quick overview of the US Army history. That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to support my work, make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal. The links are in the description below.